We have a really unique show today. I've got my former journalism colleague, Jesse Ferreras. Jesse's a UBC journalism grad, and we both kind of came of age as reporters in Vancouver. We both worked together at Global News before we went off on our different paths. And we're talking today because Jesse, after being a journalist, has written a fictional book on Vancouver real estate. It's kind of a horror story, as I understand, and as the bureau's viewers know, I wrote about the real life horror story of the Vancouver model. So I have a feeling we're going to be able to cross over the fact and the fiction and how they dovetail in Vancouver today. But Jesse, let's. I think we'll also talk about the history of Vancouver real estate in a way. We both had a front row seat. I'll get your update on it, but just start by telling us, how did you get into writing a fictional work about Vancouver real estate after being a reporter in Vancouver?
So I left journalism in 2019. Shifts just really weren't working out for me that much. I was getting really stressed, and I was only working nights and not really seeing my family too much anymore. So that was the main impetus for me to jump out and jump into communications, a completely different life. It was the right decision for me to do that. But at the same time, what I did find is that the same things that really riled me while I was a reporter continued to rile me outside the profession. I kept on seeing the same kinds of gaslighting comments that, more supply is going to fix the Vancouver housing problem, that it's offensive to talk about international capital and real estate. I mean, this was a very, very prominent narrative that was used by some very, very powerful people for a long time. And it took serious work from people like yourself, by Kerry Gold, by Terry Glavin, Ian Young, Andy Yan, David Lee, Douglas Todd, like a whole spate of people who really had to work to defeat that narrative. And, for a long time, I actually wondered if there was some truth to it until I saw a report from the National Association of Realtors, which tracks purchases in the United States. They had a chart which showed how much money on average is spent by foreign investors from different countries. The amount for Canada was approximately $680,000. This is back in 2016. And then I saw the number was like closer to $900,000 for buyers from China. And I was like, okay, so we've been talking about this in Vancouver. And if this is the case just in the United States, and we have a bigger concentration of international capital that's happening along the west coast of Canada, then how can we say that this is not having a significant impact on real estate here? I mean, the data was finally there staring me right in the face. And after I did that, started talking to Andy Yan for a lot of stories, who produced some incredible data sets about what was happening on the west side especially. I saw a lot of your reporting, which was excellent too. And then Ian Young had highlighted that there was a study by McDonald Realty at the time, which completely aligned with what Andy Yan had said. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've been wrong this whole time. We should have been talking about this a lot sooner. And I was derelict in my duty as a journalist for not talking about it. I would say the debate has changed pretty significantly since then. I don't think people try to use the same narratives that they used to. 90% of Asian communities in Vancouver approximately agree with foreign buyers taxes. They agree with measures on international capital, right? So, I mean, the kind of narrative that was used by powerful people to keep people like you down a long time ago, Sam, I would say that those have transformed pretty significantly and then moved into other arguments too. And I kept on seeing a lot of that same kind of rhetoric and thought, you know what? I have to find an outlet. Like, I have to do something. I still have to contribute to this really important community of people who have really fought to tell the truth. Like, I owe it to them as a Vancouverite. People who worked so hard, risked themselves to make this happen. So I decided, you know what? I actually really enjoyed creative writing back when I was a kid, like back age 10 in French immersion at L'École des Langues. Actually got really good reception for the stories I wrote back then. And, 30 years later, decided to try to get back into it. So I did the SFU Writers Studio, which was a fantastic program for teaching you about what really good fiction feedback is. And, wrote an entire book, which got nowhere with agents. And, just was told that I should try some short story writing. I said that there was a Gothic anthology that was getting ready to take submissions. It was based in Avoca, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, not too far from Scranton. And thought, you know what? Why don't I just give this a try? I had been turned down for short stories so many times, and then finally, I wrote a short story called Ultraviolet Night, which was inspired heavily by reporting that you did, that Ian Young did, that all these other people did that I already mentioned, and thought, why don't I write this as a tribute to those people? And so the result of that was inclusion in this anthology right here, Not As It Seems. It's a whole bunch of writers from all over the United States and the UK and Canada too. an amazing experience to be able to get that counted as part of some incredible writers who are in here. Like I'm going to single out a few of them. Roxanne Werner's another writer in here who's incredible. Cora Lane, Carolyn Bassine, just some incredible work that I saw. And what was great about it though was you got to have a little bit of fun, you know? Like I look at horror as kind of like a psychoanalytic genre in a way where you can take like real life traumas and turn them into monsters or something to help people understand what's happening. And what really appealed to the editors of this anthology is the fact that there was like, a social justice component to the story that was being told, the same things that you were writing about and reporting about for so long. So you and other people like you were actually huge contributors to the story and its appeal to get me published. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You mentioned Andy Yan and you mentioned social justice. The first thought that comes to my mind is this brilliant Simon Fraser University data scientist. And we can talk more about his work because he really helped me understand that the Vancouver model is the Canada model. And I took his findings and applied them to whistleblowers from Toronto that revealed just some crazy stuff that I'll bring in later. But before I do that, Andy Yan, yeah, he showed that in my mind, the story of Vancouver was the story of foreign capital, and it doesn't matter where it came from, but it was having a
Exactly.
disproportionate, massive impact on generations that grew up in that city. I see that you're still there. I wasn't even born there. I came there and then I left there. And so many people have done that. So we can talk more about Andy Yan. Brilliant guy. Just he's been so influential. But tell me more about, your why did you treat Vancouver real estate as a gothic horror story? Tell us a little bit more about your short story.
Over the course of writing the story, I did a lot of research into the history of Vancouver. This city is haunted by the souls of people who have been displaced time after time. I mean, one of the background pieces to the story is I started looking into the story of what happened at Snock, which is now known as Vanier Park. That was a Squamish village for a long time, where it was like a summer home for the Squamish people. I'm not going to get the exact pronunciation correct, but the proper name was Squamish people, but I'm not going to try that again just to make sure I don't butcher anything. So a lot of people are a little more familiar about what happened there. The people who lived in that property were displaced and the village was burned. But here's what's really, and that was happening, because the city and governments saw it as a priority at the time, possible new railway development happening later on. Not only were the people in that village thrown out of their homes, they were loaded onto a barge, set adrift in False Creek, Sam, and forced to watch as their village burned. It was only because a tugboat happened to be going by that they saw the barge just sitting there right up there in the water and brought it to the reserve where they were supposed to live. Like the government didn't even arrange for these people to actually, get transported to where they had, relegated them. It was just unbelievable.
That is
So that was
that's so gothic. It reminds me of a Cormac McCarthy. Is that the name of it? Who's the fiction writer that the American fiction writer that's focused a lot on borderlands? Like you
Oh yeah, that's McCarthy. We love McCarthy. We love Blood Meridian. It's my favorite book for sure.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just
That's all right.
I'm a visual thinker too, and what you described there, that is truly some gothic stuff.
Oh, it was just unbelievable. Like when I knew the detail of the burning, which is bad enough, but when I found the detail about, just leaving them set adrift like that, no care for these people, like, oh my gosh, it's just incredible. So, I understand the hardened attitude that people have about these kinds of issues, having had that happen. But looking deeper into Vancouver's history. So what I've done with the story, I have an opportunity to turn it into a novella. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the story about 40 years before its events take place. And 40 years before its events take place are Expo 86. Now, Expo, I enjoyed it as a 2-year-old. My family had great opportunities there. My father became a very prominent musician, and playing at Expo really played a big part in his career. But when you actually look at the people who were displaced to make that happen, there were like hundreds of people that were displaced from what was then known as Skid Row, now the downtown east side. People who were loggers, who were carpenters, construction workers, like literal people who built the city of Vancouver into what it was, were displaced from the downtown east, from what we now know as the downtown east side, so they could make more accommodation for international visitors. And if you see the comments from people at the time, like they just like, there was nothing but callousness toward them. The party was what mattered. like the great big carnival that was being put on, like, right along False Creek was what mattered more than anything. And the callous attitudes where you see these heartbreaking photos of people who had lived in these places for decades and they were completely displaced. And now what we're seeing too is we're seeing similar displacement happen in Vancouver now too, with all these unbelievable rezonings of different properties. We keep on being told that um, creating more supply is going to, make Vancouver more affordable. And this is one thing that I hit on in my book. That's never happened. You look at stats showing housing starts going back a decade, record amounts of housing starts. Patrick Condon has talked about this at length. Has any of that brought affordability to Vancouver? Absolutely not.
Why not? Just tell.
Well, geez, let's look at it this way. It's simple math, really. Sam, I know you know this. So I'm not talking down to you when I say this, but let's take a single family property, right? You got a single family home sitting on a piece of land. It's on the market for $2 million. Fine.
Yeah.
Sells for that much. What you then see happen, and the media has reported on this repeatedly, you take that property, you rezone it into like a duplex or a triplex, even a fourplex. And then the phenomenon you see unfolding is that each of those units, which replaced together the single family home that was there, is on the market for like 1.9 million, 1.8 million, 2 million, 2.2 million sometimes. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into the cost of housing. Materials aren't getting any cheaper. It's over $1 million to, build a house now. But the land inflation is one big part of the puzzle that neither politicians nor other observers, like a lot of people in the media, are willing to accept here. It's really only been in the last few years that I've seen people really start to focus in on that. And it's just such a huge part of the puzzle. And there's one point that's made in the story. The real villain of the story says at one point, "We built more homes and made more people homeless." Imagine that.
That really hits home, because when you were describing the market economics, my view, when I really simplified it, but when you looked at rezoning, you had a single family home, and then people always argued, whether they're NIMBYs or politicians, we make a tower, the market will have more supply, the price will go down, more people can live there. But my view was, no, you're just dividing up space into smaller units for money laundering, because the product is being sold by, I won't name the condo kings, but a couple very, very well-connected fellows that are very well politically connected. We're doing road shows, and they're like, okay, we've redeveloped, rezoned Burnaby. We now got a 50-zone twisty tower in downtown Vancouver. We're going right over to Hong Kong, and we're selling it there. Many of the people will never live there. And, as I argued in the Bureau, sorry, the Bureau is the new entity. Willful Blindness is the book that led to the Bureau. As I wrote in Willful Blindness,
got it right here.
My man, there you go, my man, your book and my book. Look, if people really start to dig into the nature of the money that funded the real estate development in Vancouver, much of it is Hong Kong triad money. And, I dug into the nature of that. So, we could talk more about that. We could talk about, I do want to mention Andy Yan, brilliant study. And he was slammed
wonderful man. Just a wonderful man
in all ways. Nice guy, super, super dope, intelligent. You can't not outthink or talk that guy. But his study, I want all the viewers to know, he did a groundbreaking study in, should be 2015, 2016, demonstrating how a neighborhood in West Vancouver, the majority, or maybe 30%, were mainland China names. And, many of the mortgagees were
non-anglicized Chinese names.
Non-anglicized, right? So it wasn't, Dennis Kun, it was, a name from China. And so his finding was that many of the people getting mortgages, presented the occupation of housewife or student or office manager.
Or blackjack dealer.
Many of them were dealing blackjack or laundering their money through casinos, which wasn't known at that time. But he broke the mold on discovering that banks were just giving loans to people that a housewife is a great job. It's raising a family, but it doesn't produce millions of dollars to afford these homes. So, I further developed his research showing that the very same thing was happening in Toronto. People with these types of occupations were getting, 500,000. They were claiming office manager job in Beijing during the pandemic, getting mortgages of millions off a claimed $500,000 a year job that's fake. And so I brought in Andy's research and said this was known. It was happening in Vancouver. It was happening at scale. And, I'm going to take a giant step back and then throw it back to you,
Sure.
what's going on in Vancouver now. But I do know, because I've been in discussions in Washington very recently, that the US government concerns with Canada do not just have to do, I'm really jumping out of the box here, with fentanyl at the
Please
border.
go ahead. Go
Look,
for it.
I've been told, and I know they have to do with Canada's lack of capacity to crack down on money laundering through mortgage lending, like the TD Bank case. So, my work is very focused on how Vancouver became that
Mm,
way. I mean, can you tell me? We can talk more about the theme of your chapter and what people should take going forward. But what's the debate in Vancouver right now? Because when I left it, let's say, actually, I'm still reporting on it, but 10 years when I was deeply invested, we were still at the time where people in politics were saying foreign investment is only 2-3% of the market.
Well, here's what we can say about that now. I would say the debate period is really low at the moment, and people have moved on to a number of other issues at the moment. And the reason it's moved there is because the market is just moribund right now. Like the economy is moving pretty slowly. There's a whole bunch of indicators that aren't really favorable to a lot of people, and a lot of properties aren't selling at the level that we would have hoped they would be. I mean, my unit, I could have probably listed this place for like where I am right now. It's a small unit, really lovely home. We absolutely love it. It's 2 bed, 2 bath, 950 square feet. We could have listed this for about $700,000 a few years ago. This year, units like mine are only really going on the market for about 650 to 680. So I'm not too concerned right now because we're not looking to move out of here immediately. We're going to stay here as long as we can and work to pay off our mortgage instead of over leverage ourselves. But there's a lot of people who got into the market during the pandemic at unbelievably low interest rates who are now finding themselves completely overstretched by this. There are people who got in, I've heard, I don't know if I can confirm this, but I mean, I've heard rumors of people who went through private lenders and got 1% interest rates for their mortgages and now finding themselves, having to pay down a variable rate mortgage 3%. And I mean, my heart goes out to people who didn't immediately appreciate what kind of risk that would present for themselves because interest rates were so low for so long. But that's largely what's happening right now. It's a huge buyer's market. I mean, I haven't really seen too many lists. I don't look at listings every day or anything, but I'm not seeing listings, show up on the market for ridiculous prices like they used to be because people will just laugh you off. I mean, one day we do hope to move into a bigger unit than this. I got 2 kids; they're 8 and 4 years old, and they're not going to get smaller. And I want to make sure that they have a lot of room to run around and have their own lives. But that's the struggle that every Vancouver family feels, whether or not we're going to be able to go anywhere from where you currently are and whether you're going to be able to have any kind of upward mobility. Because Andy himself, in a story that I wrote for HuffPost back in, I think it was 2016, said the housing ladder. There's no more moving from a condo into a townhouse and into a single home. And so we're all just kind of stuck in the same ugly place that we were before.
Yeah, I mean, is it still a generational debate where I don't monitor the blogs or the media, all that much or on a
Yeah, of
daily basis in Vancouver, but is
course.
that generational debate there where people are talking about their frustration and wanting to leave to another province or leave to another country? Are people
Yeah.
talking?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of people, do the old thing of, blaming the boomers for what's going on. And I think from your reporting and from reporting that I did too, even working alongside each other, Sam, we know that that's really simplistic. I mean, the thing is, I mean, of course, I can understand the resentment that people feel that people of a previous generation get to continue to live in bigger houses than we're ever going to be able to achieve and that, they benefited from an excellent stock market. But I mean, I used to be kind of on board with, slamming, inflating intergenerational conflict for stories and stuff. But I don't really do that anymore because that's clearly not the problem. Honestly, what we're seeing, Sam, and you know this way better than I do, it's a simple matter of greed. All this land inflation is, making a lot of people who already own these properties a lot more rich. From YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard activists, when there was a motion at Vancouver City Council to, rezone the entire city or vast swaths of it, the way the YIMBYs pitched that, they started to say, rich people need to learn to share. Does that not sound completely laughable to you?
I mean,
Because holy
I'm not
crap.
I'm not surprised at anything coming out of Vancouver because like living as a reporter and trying to like look at the nature of foreign money, you
Yeah.
heard any amount of absurdities thrown back at you, like right? So
Well, well,
nothing
well, that
surprises me.
well, that's one of the worst ones. The rich people need to learn to share. No, what that would have done, I think the rezoning was like walked back after a different council came in, but it's not exactly going to make anybody share anything. You own a single family home, all of a sudden, like, it's been subdivided for like, rezoned for like a whole bunch of different properties. The person who currently owns that property is going to make mad coin out of selling like, two, three, four units in that same space, right? So it's not sharing. And like I said earlier, a lot of these units are going for just as much as single family homes were going for on the market in the first place. So that argument doesn't make any sense to me. But I would say the most offensive one that I heard came up in the context of the redevelopment of the False Creek, co-op housing area. You know what I mean there?
Yeah, I do.
You know, huge success in terms of developing a long-term sustainable community, like, right there in an excellent location in Vancouver. And developers started to set their sights on that. There were plans for towers and moving the people there across the street. The arguments that were used in favor of trying to make that happen is that these people were all living in a wealthy enclave. And I mean, I don't know about you, what you consider wealth, but $73,000 household income doesn't exactly hit the benchmark for wealth for me. And that is
That's
no attack on anybody who makes that money. If you make that money and it's great for you, great. But I mean, I need to say at least six figures before I consider somebody living in a wealthy enclave, right? And I just thought that was unbelievable to try to use that rhetoric to push people out of their homes who had been there for generations.
yeah,
A
I mean,
generation, I should say. One generation.
no, I mean it's an interesting point, and the theme that's jumping out at me is all of our discussion and your short story. It's almost about, as you say, displacement. I'm almost seeing like clash of civilization or repeated clash of
Mm-hmm.
culture happening over a highly contested, highly with the potential to deliver massive wealth, but not in the simple ways that you might imagine. So
I, I
that
think
that
you, I think you said Clash of Civilization works. I would say that definitely works there because I mean you just have like it's the story of any city really. You have like layer upon layer. Every city is just layered, right? The first people displace, and then there's layers of displacement that came written after it.
right. So Jesse, we've covered a lot of ground from the real to the fictional and what was learned in between. So let's bring it back to your book. Just take a step away. What do you want people to learn and enjoy from what you wrote about? It sounds like very deep research into a topic that we're all living, or I lived while I was out there. You're still living it.
Well, what I hope people take away from this is that they do understand that, there's nothing necessarily venerable about a lot of the development that we're seeing. And that, people who try to, treat this as some kind of like a social justice thing, we've heard social justice arguments used in favor of capitalistic concerns. And man, I just find that offensive. So what I do hope people take away from this is understanding, like, the predatory nature of development and, what's done, like what does like create value for that particular industry. We need more housing. Absolutely. We need to find more places for people to live. We need to create the kind of housing that people actually can live in and that makes sense for them to live in. Not all these little boxes that people are just kind of controlling themselves into like circus acrobats or something, right?
All right, man. Christmas is coming up, so where can people find that book if they want to really dive in?
It's a real Christmas story, really happy, uplifting Christmas story. So they can find it on Amazon. That's the best place to find it. If you want to read the ebook version, you can also get that through Indigo. You can get that through Amazon as well. I think through Rakuten. But no, there's honestly, if you look on Amazon.ca, you'll find it there. You'll be able to find. And if you go to my Instagram, that's Instagram.com/Jesse Ramon Ferreras. You're able to find a lot more information there too. So. It's a
Right.
great thing for somebody who loves Gothic literature. Maybe don't read it to your kids on Christmas night.
All right. Okay, so Jesse, thanks so much for joining us, and I mean, best of luck with your writing and
Thank you.
all your endeavors.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's been a real pleasure. If one last thing I can say to you, at the end of my career, I got to work with you on a story that actually did involve identifying some of the people who are heavily involved in money laundering. I wasn't completely happy at the end of my career, but you gave me the biggest thrill I could have had working with you at the very tail end of it. I really felt like I did something that mattered. So thank you for having me on that one.
Thanks, man. Well, it worked out for the best for both of us. So
I think so too.
take care.
Very
We'll
happy
be in
with where we're
touch.
at.